Hi, you guys, Sarah Picaro. Today's video is by the request of people in this community. I've had requests to talk about trauma nightmares, trauma terrors, why people get them after coming out of a relationship with a narcissist, after being raised by emotionally abusive and unavailable parents, that they're now adults and they're out of those abusive relationships, but they still have nightmares about them. They're still waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, feeling like they were back there. And we're wondering why that is, what's going on. So after doing some research today in this video, I'm going to share with you some research, some studies, some findings from the Sleep Foundation. We're going to get into that. We're also going to share one-to-one client experiences that I've had with clients that I've worked personally with and how they've moved through that, where they're at now versus where they were. So I hope you enjoy this video about trauma nightmares, night terrors. Why does trauma affect our dreams? How does trauma affect our dreams and nightmares and PTSD, CPTSD? So if you've seen my other videos, we talk about that as well. PTSD and CPTSD is something that is not just associated with or connected with veterans or people who served in the military. And I like to say that this C stands for many things. It can be complex, it can be chaotic, it can be confusing. So there's all kinds of ways that the trauma shows up in your life and is woven through every aspect of your life, including one of the most important aspects, which is sleep. Sleep is nature's restorer. Sleep is a gift that we are given to restore, revitalize, rejuvenate our bodies, to reset and recalibrate. So when our sleep is disrupted and interrupted, everything else in our life feels disrupted and interrupted as well. And it's most significantly interrupted and disrupted by reliving trauma in our dreams, by trauma nightmares. So why does this trauma show up in our dreams if it's supposed to be the way that we reset and restore our lives so that we can continue our journey to healing and moving on, right? So we're going to get into that in today's video. Hope you enjoy the content. And as always, I look forward to reading your comments below. So again, this information shared from the Sleep Foundation and one-to-one client experiences and people who've gone through my Transforming Past Pain to Present Power program and what they've shared about how their sleep has changed and improved significantly. So again, if you want to find out more information about either one of those, there are links in the description below this video, but let's get to it. So after doing some research on this topic and having my own experiences and taking what I have learned from my clients and their experiences, there's not a broad consensus as to why trauma affects our dreams. But if you were raised in emotionally chaotic, emotionally unstable, emotionally neglectful environment, which led you to being in relationships with toxic people with narcissistic traits and tendencies, you know the trauma, right? A lot of times it's those invisible wounds that cause the deepest wounds, those invisible cuts that cause the deepest wounds. So it's emotional abuse, it's emotional neglect. And with that, you don't understand why, because you know physically you were safe and you were fine, but you have the most wild, chaotic, vivid, and disturbing dreams when you're going through traumatic events like that. So there's not a broad consensus as to why trauma affects our dreams. There's still research and studies being done to try and answer that question. But looking back at the researchers, Sigmund Freud, what he said or suggested was that dreams allow a view into the unconscious. So whether you want to choose to believe in that or not, there might be some validity there. Dreams allow a view into the unconscious. It's your brain and mind's way of allowing your body to try and put the puzzle pieces together. During traumatic experiences, that can feel like you had this picture of how you wanted things to be, about how you desired them to be, about how you wish that they would be. And it's like someone took the puzzle of a million pieces, mixed all the pieces up and threw them up in the air. Like your dog took some outside, chewed them up, spit them out. The neighbor kid came over and some pieces are forever gone. And your dreams are a way of trying to connect to all those pieces and put them back together so you have a really clear understanding of this and where you are in relation to that event and the internal beliefs you have about yourself because of that event. It's like your mind trying to put all the pieces together. And you know that this is the experience because you ruminate about it during the day. You try and figure out during the day. And when you finally get to sleep, your brain says, let me take some of that off your plate for you. Let me help you with some of that heavy lifting. So your brain is allowing this view into the unconscious of what's going on and trying to configure and put all those pieces together so you have this crystal clear picture so you can check the box of understanding and move forward with life. But there's a lot of misinterpretation and misunderstanding still left. So it shows up in your dreams. And I think that's what Freud was saying when he suggested that dreams allow a view into the unconscious. So he proposed that dreams protected by sleep by containing the anxiety associated with the repressed desires. But not all anxiety is repressed. You know that. Some of it is expressed. It's expressed during the day. It's expressed to your therapist. It's expressed to friends, to family. You express this anxiety. Maybe you're using tools, tips, and tricks to help you when you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack. So not all anxiety and emotions are repressed. A lot of them are expressed. So again, it might be this combination of feelings, beliefs, images, thoughts that are repressed, combining with the ones that were expressed and trying to figure out what all of this is and what it means about you and where you're at and where you're going. So mixed with fear and worry about the future, because anxiety is just worry spiraled out of control. So researchers thought that dreams allowed people to revisit and attempt to work through old trauma. And nightmares are often seen as a failure to work through or master the trauma. And I wouldn't necessarily go that far to say that nightmares are a failure to work through trauma, because a lot of times you can extract the insights in dreams based upon your meaning and your interpretation of that. So there's a lot of processing that occurs when you sleep. So to say that it's seen as a failure to work through or master the trauma, I would be really careful about attaching to that belief, because then with that paradigm and that view, you could be potentially minimizing your growth and the progress that you have made. And it could potentially make you feel more like a failure because you haven't mastered it and are wondering, am I ever going to? How long is this going to take to master this? And you're tired and you're almost afraid to go to sleep. And so you avoid sleep. So you distract yourself before bed, or you do things that interrupt your patterns of sleep, like stay up too late, like get on screens, devices, your phone. And even though you're physically exhausted, there's this fear about going to sleep because you don't want to go back into the trauma and that nightmare, especially if it's a recurring one. And doing all those things actually further disrupts your sleep patterns, habits, cycles, and behaviors. So just a word of caution there. But other researchers, they went on to share that nightmares that they thought were in a way in which the mind transformed shame that's associated with a traumatic event into fear. So that shame was transformed into fear. And that's what nightmares were about, is how the mind transforms the shame associated with a traumatic event into fear. And I think that there's some validity there with the people that I've worked with one-to-one. There's so much shame emotionally, energetically, spiritually that they're carrying about themselves, about being a part of that traumatic event. The beliefs that they've established about themselves unconsciously, because that's where we do our one-to-one work together. Even in the program, we're getting to the core and the root of what's happening unconsciously. And unconsciously, there are beliefs about yourself that you're unworthy, that you deserved this because you're just rotten at the core. You deserve to have bad things happen to you. That's why all these bad things happen to you. And because of that, the beliefs that you're never going to get out of it, you're going to be stuck in it forever, you're never going to make it, you're never going to be loved, because this core belief that you're unlovable, because these kind of things would only happen to people if they were unlovable. And so this traumatic event solidifies and validates that belief. So it's almost like this nightmare is encapsulated in shame and anxiety. that is connected and associated with that traumatic event. So I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a certified hypnotherapist, rapid transformational therapist, and transformational healer. But this information comes from a neuroscientist and psychologist who believe that dreams help integrate our experiences into long-term memory in a process called memory consolidation. And when our experiences that we've had in the past are ones that are based in a foundation of trauma, they're traumatic events. Dreams and nightmares, in this case, may reflect the body's attempt to cope and learn from these situations. So you can see there's a lot going on here. Is it suppression? Is it learning? Is it an attempt to cope? Is it shame being transformed into um, the fear that one had during the event? There's a lot going on, so there's a lot of room for interpretation here. And with this, people try and figure this out. Of course, why would you not want to, especially if you're having nightmares consistently or repeatedly? I remember when I was a child having the most, it was the strangest dream. And even though I don't have that dream any longer, I can still picture it when I'm conscious, when I'm just thinking about it. And I still have yet to interpret it. I have my own interpretations of it, but I don't know if that's actually it or not. But that's really what's happening and occurring here is we develop our own meanings, associations, and interpretations of this. So with that said, let's get into nightmares. I mean, nightmares are dreams, right? You're dreaming. It's something that happens at night while you're in a state of sleep. Nightmares are a pretty common experience with people who've experienced PTSD, whether it was a single event or a multitude of events, whether it was complex, chaotic, confusing, whether it happened in childhood. That's also another C for CPTSD, is childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's really common. It's common for people to have nightmares daily, weekly, monthly, recurring. And after experiencing or going through a single traumatic event or a number of traumatic events, it's even more common. Probably something that you wish wasn't. You wish you could just fall into a beautiful state of slumber and surrender, but that's not always the case, especially when you've been through a traumatic past. And nightmares can be a very intense expression of the body working through traumatic experiences, so intense that the nightmare can cause the sleeper to wake up. I know many times in my past and many people that I've worked with around this have jolted to wake and then kind of stood there paralyzed, their body paralyzed and frozen in fear, looking around and wondering, am I there? Was that a dream? If it was a dream, why did it feel so real? It felt like I was there and it felt like I was frozen, right? That's a trauma response, a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And more than often, when you're experiencing a nightmare, it feels like you're frozen in that traumatic event and experience again. And that could be so intense that the nightmare causes a sleeper to wake up. I've worked with other people as well who have children, and they would report like literally being in the dream, so much so that they were screaming that their children were over them, trying to wake them up to make sure that they were okay. And it was as if they could hear and feel their children trying to wake them up, and they were also in this nightmare at the same time. And so they were almost stuck between these dual worlds and experiences. They can be extremely intense. They can make your body feel frozen. You can wake up from one and physically feel like you just got done with an intense session at the gym. Your body and your muscles feel spazzing. They feel fatigued. They feel exhausted. They can even jolt you to wake. They can also represent a breakdown in the body's ability to process trauma. Depending on where that trauma is expressed, you may feel it perhaps in your neck, perhaps in your hands. A lot of times when you're experiencing a nightmare or trauma-related expression that shows up in your dreams, it's like you're trying to grab onto something or fight someone or push something away. So you wake up and your hands are tense, your jaw is tense. I know for example, in my past, I used to have to wear a night guard, and it was because I would just clench my teeth and my jaw. After doing transformational healing work, I haven't had to wear a night guard for years, but a lot of people will wake up with sore and tense jaws, hands, other parts of their body. They'll wake up with their stomach feeling like it's not. So nightmares may represent a breakdown in the body's ability to process trauma. Once that trauma is processed unconsciously and energetically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually removed, where you can look at the event, but there's no longer a strong emotional association or connection or beliefs, negative and limiting beliefs about yourself because of that event, then it's not that that event has gone, but there's no longer that connection, therefore no longer the need for your body to express that processing through the use of your dreams, and nightmares dissipate, fade away. But for many people who haven't resolved that trauma yet, their body expresses it in the form of nightmares. Naturally, most nightmares subside after a couple of weeks or months. It just depends on the intensity and severity of the event, where you're at, and the work you've done to process it. That's why the most powerful way that you can process this is using the power of your unconscious mind, because that's what's expressed when you're sleeping, when you're dreaming, as you're entering and leaving those different states of sleep, the REM sleep and the other forms of sleep. I can't name them all right now. But what happens during a frightening or traumatic event is that your body's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response is activated. There's a portion in your brain, the amygdala fires off, and it sends chemicals and hormones to the rest of your body, signaling there's danger and giving you a protective mechanism. Sometimes the protective mechanism is to fawn, is to people please, is to try to coax and calm. Sometimes it's to fight back verbally, is the most often way that people fight back. Perhaps it's to fight back physically to protect yourself. Perhaps it's to, you just feel frozen in it, you freeze, because if you run, that might cause more danger. So there are many, many ways that the body expresses and tries to protect and defend itself to keep you from harm. But when this happens consistently and repeatedly, you can become hypersensitive to danger as the body and the brain work together to release those stress hormones and chemicals from the amygdala and the other parts of the brains. Other parts of your body are impacted. Your heart rate increases, your palms begin to get sweaty, you begin to get this nervousness, like, I got to get out of here. And after you've had time to process that traumatic event, once it's over, that alarm system that's in your brain that keeps you from harm as best as it can generally quiets and does return to normal functioning. But often after that, people don't report feeling normal anymore, especially when they're now having these traumatic nightmares and dreams. So long-term repetitive nightmares are associated and linked to difficulties reducing the brain's fear response. It's like the amygdala stays open and continues to pump and flood hormones and chemicals in the body, alerting it that there's still danger out there, and it doesn't have that opportunity to close back down. And all of that gets stored in the body. The body becomes flooded with it and overwhelmed with it, consumed by it, and that also impacts sleep. So the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response can remain activated after, a full day. And all of those hormones are still going through your body as you're sleeping. So those are being incorporated into your dreams and the body trying to get to that state of rest. And it's got to get all of that out before it can. And obviously that can impact your dreams if it hasn't happened yet, even though the traumatic experience has ended. So dreams often reflect what we see, what we feel when we're awake. So after that traumatic event, or a number of them, or traumatic relationships, it's common to have nightmares and anxiety dreams. I know this isn't something that you like to hear is common, but you probably know this if you're watching this video. So the content of the dreams can be incorporated into similar feelings and sensations as those experienced during the trauma. Remember, I just talked about how your hands can be clenched and sore. Perhaps during that traumatic event, that was the same thing that was happening. You were clenched. Maybe you weren't fighting someone physically and your hands were down by your side, but they were clenched. Your jaw was clenched during that traumatic event. So those similar feelings and sensations show up in your dreams and are incorporated. So why does this all happen? Why does trauma affect dreams? You would think, I just wish I could go to sleep because I know that I need to get good sleep. And now you're trying all these supplements and you're trying all these sleep meditations and nothing is working. Well, there isn't, again, a broad consensus as to why, but there's this connection, that there's this view into the unconscious, and nightmares are really, really common. So nightmares can cause trauma. It just like trauma can cause nightmares, nightmares can cause trauma. The two can go hand in hand because vivid dreams, when you wake up and you have clear images and memories of the nightmare, that can be an unsettling experience. So it kind of seems like this catch-22. Well, nightmares can cause trauma, trauma can cause nightmares. And the hypothesis that nightmares can cause trauma may not be the subject of a ton of research as they share, but the answer to that question may depend on the way that you define trauma. There's an insight into it. One person may say, no, that's not trauma, this is, and it's a big traumatic experience. And someone else may say, no, I mean, that is, but this also is, and it's seemingly smaller, it's seemingly less important, or seemingly more insignificant. But that's the result of interpretation. So it's really hard to put research around interpretation. Say, for example, you grew up in a normal household, but your parents fought a lot and your parents ended up getting divorced. This happened with one of my clients. They were terrified, they were afraid because hearing their parents constantly argue all the time, threaten divorce, dad drinking, mom getting upset, dad storming out of the house, not coming home for weeks at a time. And the child, as a teenager at that time, was just riddled with fear, had a significant amount of nightmares then, and during the day thought, what am I going to do? I need to get a job. My mom can't support all of us on her own. She just works part-time. So this fear of they're going to have to move, they're going to lose all their friends, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to have enough money to stay in their house? I mean, there was constant arguments about money, about drinking. And the child, at just a teenager at only 13, 12 or 13 years old, started feeling like they had to work. They had to be step up. They had to take the role of the parent figure in that household because the parents were not playing the role of parent. So this child was robbed of childhood experiences and had to begin going to work and help out and support. And that led to this person being very successful as an adult because I had a very, very strong work ethic. They went on to have their own business and be very successful at it and do very well at it. But to say that hearing your parents argue as a child is not a traumatic event, that this big traumatic event is any less important, relevant, or significant, that is up for the interpretation of your unconscious mind and how it's impacting your life. And so if you're constantly having these nightmares about arguing and breaking up, can that cause trauma? Well, that client came to me because it was impacting their current and present relationship and causing traumatic events to occur in that relationship. So a lot of this is up for interpretation, for meaning. Again, I'm not a psychologist, and sometimes psychologists reserve this explanation for events that fall outside the range of normal human experiences, but define a normal human experience. So there are other definitions that have a broad view of what trauma is, and many acknowledge the source of a traumatic experience as the effect of cumulative traumas. It's very rarely just one thing. It may be, fighting and your parents getting divorced when you're younger, but it may be big traumatic events when you're older as well, or vice versa. So it's really, really difficult to say. But repeatedly hearing about traumatic experiences can cause nightmares as well. So it's not a one-way street. It can be considered a two-way street. There's not a right or wrong for any of this. But to go back to that example of the trauma being caused by parents constantly arguing, left that child in a state of fear of what was going to happen to them, where they're going to live, who they're going to live with, if they're ever going to see their parents ever again, what they can do to stop it, fix it, or change it, where they're going to go to school, how they're going to survive. All of that can be considered trauma as well. And that person, that past client, had nightmares before working together because of all of that. In just one session, we were able to get to the very core and the very root of it, and that client's interpretation and unconscious meaning that they developed about themselves, their belief system that was structured around those events, and link it to where they were at today to be able to finally break free and move forward from that and not have the nightmares anymore, because now there was a very crystal clear belief system and understanding of what was misunderstood then that was causing the nightmares. So nightmares can cause trauma. Trauma can cause nightmares. It all depends on a person. It all depends on their internal belief system, most importantly, their upbringing, their background, their mind's interpretation of this, consciously, unconsciously. I had another client who came to me and was having severe nightmares because she was going through a divorce with her husband. Her husband was actually put in jail for physical assault and other attempts at harming her, and she was continuing to relive the events that led up to that, and the everything that would happen in the court, and putting her husband in jail, and the anxiety and the beliefs that she had about what would happen if he got out, and all the fears and all the worries. Again, with her, not just one session, it took a couple, but we finally got there. She was free from the worry, free from the anxiety, free from the fear, and free from the nightmares. So it truly does take connecting at the very core and root of the unconscious beliefs that your mind has developed, that the patterns that have been established based on that foundation and structure of the belief system, and what's happening internally, what's happening unconsciously, because that is, when you go to sleep, your mind's time to try and process, try and figure that out, to try and put all the pieces together. So wherever you're at in your journey to healing, if you're having nightmares, if you're having traumatic related nightmares, I hope you found this video helpful. And understand and remember, videos are just knowledge, they're not healing. I would love to talk to you about beginning your powerful transformation into healing those inner unhealed wounds, into truly unconsciously connecting with those established beliefs that your unconscious mind has about itself because of the events you've experienced from your past, especially if they're causing you an inability to sleep, a disruption in your sleep, and causing nightmares in your life today. You deserve to be free from those. Everyone does. So again, you can find out more information in the links in the description below this video. Until then, I hope you found this information I have shared today helpful. Thank you guys. Until next time, see you.